Welcome, Mr. Stevens.
Thank you.
I'd be honored to just have a chat with you. It's not an interview, it's more like a chat.
Okay.
Also, we have minutes for others to have discuss and ask the questions what they have in their minds about it. First of all, I've been reading about you before since I've known that you are coming here. I know that you have invented the first digital still camera. Also, it took a long time to be as used as now the consumed camera, the consumer kind of camera. As well as I've seen a couple of videos on YouTube when you are talking about the process of it. But one thing I wanted to know very much about it, how did this start from the beginning? I mean, since you were a kid, did you have that kind of feeling that you wanted to create something new, or does it happen suddenly?
Well, thank you for inviting me here. It's a real pleasure to be at the Photographic Club in particular, so I think that's great. I think I always was curious even as a young child. I like to build things. I like science and technology. And I remember reading books about electron tubes when I was 10 years old. I mean, I liked that stuff. I didn't always understand it at all, but I liked it, you know. And so I used to build things as a kid. And I built transmitters and radios and amplifiers and set off a few explosions, kid stuff. But I quickly gravitated toward doing electronics, and in high school I looked for a college that would allow me to study electrical engineering, and I went to the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in my country, in Troy, New York, and there I studied electrical engineering and got my master's degree in 1973. And then I went to work for Eastman Kodak Company, and I didn't know anything about photography. The reason I went to work for Kodak was because photography was becoming more electronic. I was an electronic guy, but photography was becoming more electronic. And by electronic, I mean that the cameras of the day that used film, more and more of the cost of those cameras was being devoted to electronic components like flashes, film advance, putting sound in projectors, that kind of thing, motor controls. And so they were hiring a lot of electrical engineers. And so it was sort of an accident in the sense that I ended up just at the right place at the right time, where my interest in how light affected silicon, and I did my master's thesis in that area, coincided with an opportunity that got created in 1974 when the first commercial charge-coupled device became available. Now that device had been invented in the Bell Laboratories in 1969 by two fellows named Boyle and Smith. And the first commercial devices were made by a company called Fairchild. And it was a two-dimensional array of pixels, 100 by 100 or 10,000 pixels or 0.01 megapixels by today's way of talking about these things. And that was an enormous device, and my supervisor in the research lab I was working in, I was a brand new engineer. He suggested I get one of these things and see what it could do. Measure its properties, see if it was useful for anything, because our laboratory looked at many different types of uses for different parts. And because I had studied how light affected silicon in college, I was very interested in the topics. So I got one of these. And the rest is kind of history. I mean, I thought the reasoning went, well, if I have to measure its imaging performance, how am I going to do that? I'll have to capture an image of some kind. And if I capture an image, wouldn't it be nice to make it into something that walks around? Oh, that's like a camera, but it's all electronic. And then I thought, being an electrical engineer, I thought, wouldn't it be really neat or interesting to make a camera that had no moving parts at all? And then I thought to take a digital approach, because I didn't know how to do it any other way. And after about a year of work, I was able to take my first digital snapshot.
That's a great kind of experience saying that you have started from the young age, you've been trying, and I don't know how many explosions that happened at the house.
A few too many for my
I've read you
parents, I
were
must tell
working
you.
in the basement and the roofs of your home.
I worked in the basement largely, but I put antennas up on my roof.
Yeah.
So it annoyed both the people upstairs and downstairs.
And how were your parents with this kind of
Well,
thing?
they tolerated it to the point where, well, the explosions, that they didn't like that. But I ran my wires up on the roof, and I became a ham radio operator when I was about 12. And I started to transmit Morse code to different ham radio operators around the world because I thought it was, interesting to do. It turns out, though, when you transmit, and I was in Brooklyn, New York, so the houses were very close together, whenever I transmitted, I knocked out all the TVs in the neighborhood. So that didn't make my parents very happy either because they had to answer the phone. So there were times when it was a little bit difficult to do these things, but largely they were very tolerant of it.
And I think I'm sure they're proud of this kind of invention you've become with. So you've said that you started working in Kodak in
1973. Yes.
1973, and the first invention came in 1970.
Yes, I did a couple of little projects before I got involved with this one. And you might be surprised, you think, we look back on this and we look at the development of the camera as a big deal. But the project itself wasn't. It was really a side job. It was a job they gave a new engineer to keep him out of trouble until he could do some real work. And so I had no budget or I had no supervision. I didn't have to write reports. I was just to play with this thing. My supervisor, who was directly supervising me, he was the only person who knew what I was trying to do. And even he didn't know I was building a portable camera. Not because he was uninterested, it's just because it wasn't that important. It was just an experiment. I don't know what he's doing. He's doing something, So in a sense, that was very good because it allowed me the freedom to try things. I was at a little back lab, and if it failed, I wasn't afraid people were going to come in and say bad things because they didn't know what I was doing in the first place. So it gave me a bit of freedom that was beneficial for the many failures that I had.
And how was your laboratory? Was it fully equipped? Was it highly in the kind
No,
of
it was
techniques?
a closet. It was, you see, when you work in a corporate laboratory, you, like any organization, you only command the resources commensurate with the expected return. And since this project had absolutely no commercial value, it had no immediate value, it was just something they gave me to do because it was something they thought they should look into. I had really no budget, and so that I couldn't command many facilities. So a friend of mine found a back lab. It really was a back lab. Everybody says they work in a back lab, but I really did. It was the furthest one in the back at the end of a hallway, and they had used it as a storage room closet. We cleaned it out and set up our equipment there. And you'd be surprised at how little equipment was involved. It was really a signal generator, an oscilloscope, a wire wrap gun, a soldering iron, and a voltmeter. And that was it.
That's it.
The entire device was built with those tools, maybe a pair of pliers and some screwdrivers. And we built it piece by piece, and we worked for over a year, never seeing anything. You never saw an image. All I saw were oscilloscope traces or voltage measurements. So when I would do a certain part of the circuit, I would look for a voltage waveform that was what I was expecting. It wasn't that I could see the image. It was just I could see a waveform, and then I know that circuit was working and move it together. It was only until the entire process was done that I could actually see an image.
كسؤالي عن موضوع المختبرات، كانت مجهزة تماما أو كانت متطورة في حيث تجهيزها؟ جواب الأستاذ ستيفنز كان أنه لا، كان المختبر بسيط جدا، وبالعكس يعني كانت المعدات معدودة، وحتى النتيجة كانت تظهر بعد يعني خلال السنة. أصلا كانت النتائج بطيئة وبعضها يعني ما كان فيها، لم ترى النور بعد. فمبدئيا كان هذا الجواب. So can you talk about the first digital camera, the one that started in 1975? How was that experience? What happened that you have discovered that, yeah, it
You
worked?
mean after I first built it, took my first pictures?
The first pictures. I've heard that there was a lady working in the...
Yes, the first picture, it was in early December of 1975 that Jim Schickler, the technician, was working with me, and I were in that lab, and we finally finished doing test patterns on the playback device. You know, half of the project was building this box that would play back these images because there were no personal computers to use. So we had to build our own. And we had finished our test pattern, and then Jim suggested we take a picture of a black and white image, black on one side, white on the other, full frame. And we did that because when we looked at the oscilloscope traces, every line looked the same, so it would go from dark to light, and we'd look for that on the oscilloscope. And we saw that that was looking reasonably well. So then I remember this because it was more funny than anything else. I looked at Jim, and Jim looked at me, and he said, we got to take a picture of something, but there's nothing in this lab I'd take a picture with. It was just a...
Didn't you take a selfie or something? No selfies.
This was before selfies.
Before selfies, yeah.
A lot before selfies. You couldn't take a selfie with this camera. You'd have to be very strong. So I carried the camera down the hallway, and there was a young lab technician. Her name was Joy Marshall, and she was sitting at a teletype, and I remember this. And I asked her if I could take a picture of this, you know, holding my camera, which was a strange-looking device. And she knew us because we had been working there for over a year, and she knew us as we were little strange people working in the hallway, but she said, okay. And so I took a head and shoulder shot of her, just, like from here up. And she had long black hair, and the wall was a solid color, light color. And when I took my picture, I would aim my camera, and I would take the exposure. The exposure was 1/20th of a second. It was all available light. And then the tape would start to move. I stored my images on a magnetic cassette. And the tape would start to record. And that was the 23 seconds it took to take from the buffer memory in which the image was stored and record it to the tape. So I knew a picture had been taken. And I walked back to the laboratory, and when the tape stopped, I knew the picture was fully recorded. And I popped it out. I would pop the tape out of the camera, and then I'd plug it into an equivalent reader connected to this home-built playback system that we had built. And it would read the tape in. And then we had to actually do image processing. A lot of people don't realize we did image processing back then, but we did. We had to take the 100 lines of information and interpolate those. You know what that is? That's a mathematical operation to do a spreading of information. It doesn't add any information, but it made it add form to the image so that I could display it in a reasonable aspect ratio on a TV. And 30 seconds later, the picture popped up, and I could see her hair, I could see the face, outline of the face, and I could see the background. But the image was completely static. You couldn't see her face at all. It was all distorted. And I remember I remember this very clearly. Jim and I were standing there, and we were looking at the screen, and we said, oh, this is fantastic. This is wonderful. So much is working. Because we knew 1,000 reasons why we might not see anything at all. And we saw the outline, we saw the hair. The fact that the face looked completely static, that didn't bother us at all. Well, Joy had followed us in the room. And she was standing by the doorway, and she looked at it, and she said, needs work, and turned around and walked out. And what I had done is I had made a mistake in the wiring of the bits, and we took about an hour to figure it out, and then we rewired it, and then I could see her face quite clearly, and that was the first digital snapshot.
That's a great thing. I'll be explaining
Oh yeah,
that.
please, I'm taking too long.
I'll be asking you each second, sorry. So basically, في سنة 1975 أستاذ ستيفنز بدأ مع زميل له في بناء الكاميرا كبداية، وكانوا يبون يختبرونها على كخلفية كصورة لها خلفية بيضاء وأسود عشان كبداية للصورة. بعد ما مبدئيا كانت الصورة هي أرقام راح تتحول إلى صورة، يعني digits إلى a form of image. فاتجهوا لي زميلة في المختبر وطلبوا منها الصورة. طبعا كان في البداية رد فعلها إن في استغراب، لأن شخصين غريبين تماما يعني إليها يبون يسألونها هل ممكن يصورونك أو لا. بعد الموافقة أخذوا لها صورتها، ولكن بعد 20 ثانية بعد ما أظهروا الصورة واشتغلوا في عملية تظهير الصورة وتحويلها من الأرقام إلى كصورة في التلفاز، كانت الصورة للأسف غير واضحة. بس فرحتهم لأنها بس أظهرت لأول مرة ظهرت لهم شكل صورة أو شكل اللي شيء ممكن راح ينجح في المستقبل. بعد ما تم تصليح طلعت في مشكلة في خلل في الوايرات. بعد التعديل طلعت الصورة الحقيقية. طبعا في البداية تفضلت الزميلة، شافت صورتها في البداية اللي كانت غير واضحة، انتقدتها، ولكن هم كانت فرحتهم أن هذا الشيء ممكن يقود إلى شيء أكبر. What inspired you to start this kind of work? I mean, haven't you had that moment when you said, it won't work? I mean, I've been working for forever, and that's kind of thoughts.
Oh yes, it took us over a year, and we had no design. We had to invent every day, because nobody had ever done this before, and I wish someone had done it before, because I made lots of mistakes, and there were many times when I thought this thing would never work because it was so complicated to get all the pieces together, because I used many different forms of technology that were never meant to work together, but they had to work together to do this function, which had never been really done before, so you wouldn't expect to have technology lying around to do this. So to answer your question, yeah, just about every day I thought there would be, I was never sure it would actually all work until the very end. When I saw that first picture, then I knew it worked. I knew electronically from the waveforms I saw, but I never saw anything, so you were never really sure.
بالطبع كان الجواب انه يعني لمدة سنة كل يوم عمل كان يتردد فيها الموضوع، وان هالشيء ممكن راح يصير او لا يعني. ولكن مع ان الترددات كانت تشير ان في شيء راح ينتج في النهاية. في لحظة انك اكتشفوا الصورة اللي طلعت، هي كانت يعني اللحظة الأهم، واللي هي أعطتهم إشارة أن فعلا هالشيء راح يكون له مستقبل مستقبليا يعني. ولأنهم استخدموا الكثير من التكنولوجيا المعقدة، فبس هاللحظة اللي شافوا فيها الصورة وانتبهوا أن لا فعلا في دليل أن هالشيء راح يتطور في المستقبل، هذا يعني كان أزاح كل التعب للفترات الماضية منها. How did you face the people of Kodak, starting from now you have your camera, you have the first photo, and how did you present your invention?
I first showed it to my immediate supervisor, and like I said, he didn't even realize that the camera was portable. He thought people had to come into the lab to see it, and I said, no, I can pick it up and carry it around and take pictures. And so he thought it would be a good idea to invite the managers into a conference room, and we could take pictures there, which is what we did. And so we met with Kodak managers throughout the year 1976, in addition to other people and patent lawyers and things. And rather than describe the system, one of the good things about having a working prototype is you can show the system. And that's a tremendous advantage to an inventor, because the person in the room doesn't have to have an imagination. So you could argue whether digital photography was a good thing or a bad thing or possible or not practical. It's a different thing to argue with the concept of digital photography when your face is staring at you from a screen that the picture was just taken. And that's really what I did. I took pictures of people in the room, put them up on the screen in the room, and then we had a discussion. And the discussion was wide-ranging and quite long.
I've heard in an interview in YouTube with you that they've asked you about the results more than the actual techniques, or that how did you build the camera?
Yeah.
And did that thing kind of held you down of experience, showing them your experience?
I think inventors get surprised by that, because inventors spend a lot of their time figuring out the how of something, and the world is really interested in the why of something. And that's what happened to me. I had spent a year trying to figure out how to get this to work, all the technical tricks, all of the shortcuts, all of the calculations to get it to work. And they never asked me about any of that. They asked me more why. Why would someone ever want to look at their picture on a television set? What would an electronic photo album look like? Why would one want one? When would this ever be practical? Would it ever be practical? I had a black and white camera. Is color possible? These are the questions that I hadn't really considered. So my demonstration was grabbed their attention, but I wasn't very effective at projecting the whys because I hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about it.
بداية كسؤال كيف عرض الفكرة لرؤساء كوداك ومدراءها. كبداية جمعوا طبعا الرؤساء والمانجرز وغيرهم في قاعة الاجتماعات مع المحامين، لأنها راح تكون فكرة اختراع جديد. بعد عرض الفكرة طبعا بدلا من شرح الفكرة بدأ الناس يتساءلون عن سبب الفكرة، أو يعني استهجنوا وجود هالشيء بينهم. لما يود الشخص أنه يشوف نفسه عن طريق إلكترونيا بدل ما يشوف نفسه في صورة؟ لما الشخص ممكن يشوف نفسه بالصورة أبيض وأسود بدلا عن صورة ملونة وغيرها؟ طبعا مستر ستيفنز ما كان عنده الأجوبة اللي يرد فيها يدحض فيها الأفكار، لأن مبدئيا يعني هو اشتغل كفكرة وحاول يبنيها أكثر ما يفكر برد فعل الآخرين. Clearly, after hearing what the other ideas of the people have about having their ideas about your thing, the camera, the digital camera, how did you manage to keep up staying out of the box? I think the whole concept have started from 1975 until 1994, I guess, until the actual consumer camera. How did you manage to keep up thinking of more and more, instead of some people would have, after being criticized, being let down?
An invention is a good one when you generate more questions than you can possibly deal with. Because an invention is really about generating questions. That's really what innovation is about. And this was a good question. How can we, what are the steps necessary to make this approach to photography viable, practical? And I knew that there was many different areas of technology that were required. The imagers had to get bigger and better. Digital memory had to get much bigger, much better, and much less expensive. And computing and digital image processing had to get much faster, cheaper, and better. So I worked in each one of those different areas over the next 20 years, working on different aspects of that. So you break up the problem. The first presentation was the whole problem. And then you break up the problem into pieces. And different people work on different pieces. I didn't build my second camera until 1989.
A decade and more?
Yeah.
More than a decade.
Because I didn't have to demonstrate the system anymore. People got the concept, but now we had to make it real. And technology had to advance, some of which could be done at Kodak, but most of that had to be done in the rest of the world. And so I worked on pieces. I worked on image processing. I worked on image compression. I worked on memory systems, digital memory systems, all pieces, all focused toward this. But I didn't really feel a need to build a whole camera because the pieces weren't there yet. The concept was clear, the pieces weren't there yet. It wasn't until '89 when I built a second camera that we demonstrated what would be considered now the modern DSLR. And that was demonstrated with some hand-built cameras in 1989.
مبدئيا كيف استمر في تطوير نفسه بعد ردود الفعل، خصوصا انه كان في من المعارضين على فكره تصوير الديجيتال وغيره. فمبدئيا كانوا يشتغلون مو بس لتطوير الفكره، لان الفتره اخذت من 1975 الى 1989 لانتاج الكاميرا الثانيه اللي هي الاكثر تطورا، وهي عاده اعتقد هي الاقرب للمودرن، الكاميرا الحديثه اللي نستخدمها الحين. طور من نفسه، طور كل اعتبر البدايه اللي في سنه 1975 عرض الكاميرا في هالوقت كان هو مشكله اكثر ما هو اختراع. فهالمشكله عقب ما حللها ودقق شنو المشاكل اللي صادفته فيها، اتجه لحل اللي هو في 1989 لما انتج الكاميرا الثانيه وهي الاكثر حداثه وبنفس الوقت هي اصح تقريبا من الاولى. You've worked in Kodak. Did you have any other challenges from the external environment, from the other companies and other foundations, other people?
You mean around digital photography?
Yeah, around that. Did someone try to steal the main idea and just develop it? Or
no, most of the intellectual property that has been generated in the field of digital photography, certainly in the early days, was generated at Kodak. And there were increasingly larger numbers of people working in digital photography. Kodak made the first megapixel sensor in the world and demonstrated it with a color filter array, which was the Bayer filter array, which the photographers in the room should be familiar with. That was invented by Bryce Bayer in 1976, and I knew Bryce, and he was working in the research labs about the same time I was doing my work. So I think Kodak knew a lot about what was going to happen. There was some interesting diversions into digital electronic photography. The Sony Mavica system was introduced in the 80s. It didn't really hit commercial application until the late 80s, but it was based on a television standard and it was completely analog. And we knew that whatever was going to happen with digital photography, it was going to not be based on the television set, but be based on the home computer for image quality reasons and for format reasons. And so that's why Kodak had most of the fundamental inventions in digital photography throughout the 80s and into the early 90s.
مبدئيا عندما سألته إذا كان في منافسين في خارج كوداك، اتضح أن كانت شركة كوداك نفسها مهيمنة على جانب الفوتوغرافي الديجيتال فوتوغرافي لحد سنوات المتأخرة من الناينتيز، من التسعينات. بعض الشركات اللي اشتغلت وظهرت كانت لها نطاق آخر مختلف، فما حسوا بالتهديد الخطر اللي هو من منافس آخر. Do you think that the digital camera, the first one, the one in 1975, was your biggest achievement?
No. I worked on so many things, you know. It was probably the most fun. And it basically made the biggest difference in my life because after that I was convinced that I wanted to work in this field. But you must understand that it was totally impractical in 1975. It was a joke. It wasn't serious, but it was interesting, you know. But I was interested in it, so I worked in digital photography my whole life, and so I did many interesting projects. And some of those were I thought harder to do almost, but they're not as popular, you know. Some of those were having to do with printing, which had a bigger impact on people, certainly in the 90s. I developed a thermal printer that was used for all the kiosks around the world. And that affected a lot of people in the 90s. So like in 1995, if you asked me that question, I would say, well, of course the thermal printer I did, because it's being used all over the world. Nobody was buying digital cameras yet, and I had built that 20 years ago. So, I mean, that's how I have to answer the question. And I think it's pretty common with inventors, you know. Inventors, they're always inventing things. They like to build things. And so in the course of their lives, they experience many different things. And then fate comes along and picks out one thing that they did and amplifies it. But from the view of the inventor, it's just one of many things that they did. So that's the best answer I can give you.
من سؤالي لا إذا كان يعتبر الكاميرا الديجيتال الأولى اللي اخترعها هل هي أكبر إنجاز بالنسبة له؟ طبعا كان رد الفعل أنه لا بالعكس كانت جزء من الإنجازات اللي أنتجها في حياته، بس هي اللي عادة ظهر عليها برزت أكثر. وإذا كانت في سنة مثلا لو سألت نفس السؤال في سنة 1995 كان رد الفعل راح يكون بالعكس لا الطابع أحسن، لا كانت استعمالها أكبر وكانت الناس تستهجن فكرة الديجيتال كاميرا. More like this. Right now, asking this question right now, not in 1995, do you think that that there is a more complicated future for photography in general? I mean, you've seen everyone is using photography. I mean, everyone is using it right now. I mean, everyone taking photos and those the selfies and the social media things. Do you think there's something more coming up? No one thought.
That was beyond my imagination. Yeah, photography is evolving. Pictures are everywhere. We use pictures now as part of our everyday conversation, you know. And I think picture taking has been largely made available to everybody at low cost. I think there are still challenges with respect to storing images, retrieving images, and maintaining the fidelity of images over time. Those are still challenges that face us. But I think it's no getting away from the fact that every person probably in this room has been photographed probably 10 times today, or are part of an image. Because there are photographs taking place on cars, on street signs, everywhere. So it's definitely part of our future. You know, what we do with it is another question. You know, how we handle it. Because photography can be doing really important things, like helping in medicine and space exploration, and they can be doing trivial things like selfies and things like that. You know.
باختصار إن كان يعتقد أن التصوير راح يتطور إلى نطاقات أكبر وأكثر تعقيدا من الشيء اللي قاعد نشوفه الحين الاستعمال اليومي وغيره. طبعا كرد فعلا يعني هو ما توقع وجود التصوير الشخصي أو السيلفي في خلال فترته، فما بال اللي راح ياي أكثر، خصوصا أنه ما زال في بعض المشاكل وبعض العراقيل في مجال تخزين الصور، ويعني هالشيء ممكن يتطور. هو السؤال أيضا أنه مو هو طريقة الاستعمال بكثر ما هو الاستعمال اللي راح يستعمله الشخص، هذا اللي راح يتطور في المستقبل أكثر. My last question, and I'll be just giving the chance to our audience. What is your advice to those dreamers out there, the people who are thinking, well, I want to do something different. I want to leave a print out there. I want to be known by something. How did they start, from your point of view?
I think the advice is simple, but it's just sometimes hard to execute on. It's find your passion and follow it, whatever it is. If you love to do it, then go after and do it. That's much easier said than done sometimes due to a lot of practical limitations. I was very lucky. I was working in the premier imaging company in the world. I was allowed to pursue my interests in digital photography right from when nobody was interested in, right up until when everybody was interested in it. So I was very lucky to be able to do that. But if I hadn't been allowed that opportunity, I probably would have went somewhere else and still kept working on it because I found it fascinating. I found it fascinating, the fact that I could take light and I could turn it into electrical signals and I could somehow make images appear anywhere. That to me was like magic, you know, and so I just wanted to see that happen. And so I was lucky enough to be able to follow that, but it's all about finding your passion and sticking with it.
اللي ودهم انه يتركون بصمه في حياتهم خلال تجاربهم الحياتيه خصوصا العلميه، ان الانسان يسعى لما يحب اكثر ما يعني يفرض نفسه على شيء اخر، خصوصا انه هو ممكن حالفه الحظ في مجاله انه عمل في اكثر الشركات الحرفيه في هالموضوع، بس مره اخرى يعني المساله عن شغف الانسان باللي وده يشتغل فيه، اذا ما كان موجود الشغف ما راح ينتج او راح يبدع فيها. For now, we will leave the questions to the audience.
Okay.
Hopefully, they have good ones.
Well, the mechanism for capturing images in the foreseeable future is, I think, what anybody would project. It's becoming more and more a non-intrusive event. You'll be photographing everything. You'll have cameras that'll be buttons on your shirt or parts of your glasses or it'll be part of your clothing, you know. And much like Google Glass, for example, you know, that's happening today. I don't know anybody wants to wear a Google Glass all day, but I think photography, you'll be capturing images. The real challenge isn't capturing the images. What we want out of images are stories. We want stories. We want to be able to relate something about our lives. And that means composing and taking images or a series of images and turning them into a story. And that's really the challenge that gets faced right now. And automatic ways of doing that, I think, are of primary interest to a lot of people right now. So in the next few years, I think you'll see a lot of automatic scene recognition and categorization. I think you'll see a lot of image processing, very specific image processing, tailored around creating stories, getting rid of redundant information and presenting only relevant information.
Do you think that innovation is narrowed in those who have the talent in them, starting from the beginnings of their lives, or anyone can have that innovation kind of quality in them? Is innovation does it start from the beginning of someone's life to be as a talented or a giving kid? Or is it only you can like train yourself to be innovative?
Well, I think innovation is all around us. It's problem solving, and so we all solve problems every day. Little problems, you know, where to store my toothbrush so it's convenient for me in the morning. You know, little things. These are all solving problems, but you can get better and more efficient at solving problems. And that requires training, education, and practice. And so like anything, I don't think it's that unusual compared to anything else you do. If you have an interest, you'll immediately find the problems. You get passionate, you'll find the problems. And then you innovate to try to solve those problems. And then you'll have to become efficient at it, because if you innovate in any commercial sense, there's always a cost to the amount of time it takes to solve a problem. And so you have to become more efficient, and that means spreading the work around, which goes to the communication aspect of what I talked about before. So I think it ties together. It starts with passion, it goes with solving problems, and then it goes to spreading the risk, spreading the work, and making it more efficient so that you can get more people interested.
Did this camera starting from the camera? So you've started having the photo of your coworker, the one who's working in the laboratory. The other additions, the effects, the other techniques, the more developed ones. Did you work by those things, or did someone else come up with those effects and the other techniques?
What effects are you talking about?
The modern kind of effects, the zooming and the other kind.
Well, zooming has been around a long time. Optical zooming had nothing to do with digital photography. But yeah, you know, being at the beginning of digital photography was certainly a privilege and an honor to be there. And the reason it was such a joy is to see how all these other smart people started working on different aspects of it. And so image processing, if he's referring to image processing, this took place over probably starting in the mid-1980s and then got into real, as computing power got going. Microprocessors, the big challenge in my time during this was the microprocessor couldn't address enough memory so I could do what I wanted to do. So I could barely hold an image and do something simple to it. Computers got much more powerful, and memory addressability got much more powerful. And then around the early 90s, people started doing Photoshop and other image processing techniques. And Kodak did it, and other people did it as well. So the whole world did it.
مبدئيا أن كفكرة الكاميرا هو فعلا كان له الشرف أنه يبتكرها ويبدي فيها، بس جميع الإضافات وجميع خصوصا في عملية تظهير الصورة وتحويلها من الأرقام الإلكترونيا إلى صورة ممكن تنشاف، كان عمل على قولته يعني كان كل العالم شارك فيه، جميع المخترعين من كذا مكان حاولوا يطورون فيها الفكرة.
There were times when you would be doing an experiment and looking at one part of the circuit very intensely. You have your oscilloscope running, your voltage, you're really focusing, and then all of a sudden you start to smell smoke, and all of a sudden you'll see another part of your circuit on fire or something, right? And you quickly jump up and you try to put this thing out, and you were embarrassed, and you see what the heck happened, and something you never thought about, went wrong. Right, and then all of a sudden you have to go and explain, why the fire department was called to your laboratory, and it doesn't seem funny at the time, but it's funny when you think back on it.
من أطرف المواقف اللي مرت علي، طبعا مواقف طريفة كثيرة خصوصا في هذا المجال اللي يعمل فيه، بس من أطرف المواقف اللي مرت يعني مثلا في حال عمل على اللي هي السيركت اللي هي الدائرة الكهربائية والتركيز أو الشغف الكامل في الدائرة الكهربائية، يكتشف مثلا ريحة الحريق طبعا، وكانت جزء آخر من الدائرة هو اللي قاعد يحترق، وطبعا أطرف شيء إنه يعني يضطر إنه يبرر لدائرة إطفاء الحرائق اللي إنه شنو السبب لهذا الموضوع.
That happened in '98, and that was the first time that I think I told my wife that I had worked on the digital camera. Also at that time, a lot of people think that's strange, but they don't realize it wasn't that popular when I first did it. So. I just remember that because it was one of those things where I was at a faraway place. Yellowstone's far away from where I normally live. We were on vacation. I was very much away from my normal work and my work friends, and I was just away. I was in a different world, And when you're relaxing, waiting for some magnificent natural occurrence to occur, you look around and you start to see it. You just see it. And that's when it hit me, This is really going to make an impact on people's lives. They're going to actually use this thing, And it did. It made me smile, It made me, feel good that, it was fine. That's what the words I use. Remember, I said it's finally happening. That's what I said to Cindy. It's finally happening. And then she asked me, "What are you talking about?" And I told her about my first camera. And that was. I remember that. It was a good feeling. It was because I was away from my world. I was just like a person on vacation, and I saw it, And sometimes when you're so close to work, you don't realize the impact it has, because you're surrounded by your environment. You're surrounded by the problems. You're surrounded by all of the things you're trying to do to make it work. And this was that one instance where I was away from it. I was like a different person in a different world, and you just saw it. And that's why I shared that story yesterday.
At the end of this, I'm pleasure to have this chat with you, and as well as the Kuwait Science Club family. We're here to honor you just for having this time with us, sharing these moments with you.